And this was his answer.
Do you ever wonder what might happen if you were in a room alone with President Putin? Would that help at all to resolve this war?
It's not interesting for me. Not interesting to meet. Not interesting to speak. Why? Because we had meeting with him in Normandy format. It was before the full-scale invasion. I saw the man who said one thing and then did another.
Is it too late now?
Too late? Not interesting. Who is he now? After full-scale invasion, for me, he's nobody. Nobody.
So Putin's nobody, but Putin's the man that he has to negotiate with if he wants to end this war, right?
Yeah, so Zelensky, he's a nobody. I don't want to speak to him. Send Sean Penn, he's my friend. You know, more celebrities. Send Nancy Pelosi. Send Boris in with the long sleeves and the jacket. So, I mean, this is again, Mike, back to the original Victoria Nuland thing. Zelensky, same type of script. We're not going to negotiate with the Russians. We're not prepared to. Let's carry on with the war. And so, you know, you won't have any sort of pushback in the Ukrainian media because Zelensky has banned opposition media. He's banned opposition political parties. If you speak up and you're seen or labeled as sympathetic to the Russian cause or a Russian talking point, like wanting to negotiate peace or stop the war or anything like that, you're attacked. You could be violently attacked in Ukraine. That's just the atmosphere right now. And the United States, Britain, and the NATO countries are absolutely cheering it on 100%.
It took him quite a long time to answer that question. He didn't seem to be quite on the ball or quite on point.
He could have had a long night. He didn't look very good. It looked like he had a bit of a rough night, or maybe this is just his normal modus operandi.
Or is there something causing pressure in Ukraine within his own government? Could that be it?
I think he's under constant pressure. He is a puppet at the end of the day. He was doing low-grade vaudeville Ukrainian television sitcoms like 3-4 years ago, and all of a sudden he was voted in as president. It shows you how cynical the Ukrainian electorate was, but also there's an electronic voting aspect to their sort of modern democracy as well. That's worth looking into. Maybe we'll be able to do that in the future, maybe not, Mike. But the real problem here is, look at this scandal. Ukraine has been rocked by a major corruption scandal. We're talking about embezzlement. We're talking about Lamborghinis. We're talking about European villas, mansions, and luxury vacations by Ukrainian officials, including his advisors, Zelensky's own inner circle, and his deputy ministers, and so forth, defense officials. Mike, the pilfering is just off the charts. And this is an internal corruption scandal in Ukraine. You can imagine what the real story is. It's probably 100 times worse. We're writing out blank checks to this corrupt country that was at the top of the corruption index globally before the war, and then we're all meant to think that somehow Ukraine became this bastion of morality and transparency just after Putin invaded, and Zelensky became world saint and all the rest of it. Look, the grift, honestly, this is me editorializing here, my opinion, the grift has to end, okay? This country has sucked enough out of the Western purse and dumped it into a black hole, a financial money pit that's called Kiev.
But the thing is, it's not going to end. So they've just had the Ramstein defense conference where they've managed to get the tanks issue sorted out, it seems, and possibly aircraft as well. They are now talking about setting up a similar mechanism for the financial side to make sure that they can bully countries and to keep pumping the money in as well. So, you know, where is that money going? Where's the accountability for all the tax dollars that's gone into the Ukraine already?
It should be an audit. There should be an audit of every penny. Can Europe afford it? Can the UK afford it? Can the United States afford to be pumping money and weapons and aid and all the rest of it? No, they can't. Where's the money going? It's ending up in Switzerland. It's ending up in Italy. It's ending up in Miami. It's ending up all around the world in Dubai. It's ending up everywhere but where it should be or where it's intended to be. And the weapons that we're sending, we'll show you in a minute, they're not ending up on the battlefield. They're ending up on the dark web, on the black market. A tremendous amount of trafficking, which we'll detail in a minute, Mike. But this, look, it's time to cut them loose. I mean, if it was me in charge, cut Ukraine loose and let them sue for peace. Let them sue for peace. There's going to be no end to the war. There's going to be no peace. There's going to be risk of escalations as long as we keep funding this and dumping weapons into what is becoming the world's biggest heap of scrap metal. So we'll show you some
let's start looking at
details on that in a minute.
Scrap metal.
But this is a real corruption scandal in Ukraine, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. I can guarantee you that. So we'll see more reports. Notice the mainstream media is not talking about that scandal. All of these Ukrainian officials forced to resign because of corruption. I'm not seeing that on the BBC. Why not? Shouldn't that be front and center? Shouldn't that be the #1 story? BBC, Times, you guys, not worth covering? Guardian, not worth covering. Must not be a significant story, especially since we're sending hundreds of millions of billions of dollars there. I guess it's nothing.
Okay, let's move on to the tanks issue then.
So the big ticket items, Mike. Last week we reported that the United States weren't going to send Abrams tanks. So this is an update on the delivery of the future scrap metal for Ukraine. And let's see let's see, Joe Biden. He's woken up and he's been told this is happening. So this is the M1 Abrams tank. This is the big ticket item for the United States. This is supposed to be the game changer. This is going to turn it all around for Ukraine. Well, according to British DOD, they don't have to turn it around because they're winning by a long shot and Russia's holding on for dear life, according to the intelligence update we just showed you, but disregard that. So here's the story. Biden reverses decision, pledges to send tanks. The key word, Mike, is pledges. Are they going to actually send them?
Well, they've already said that they're not sending them in time for the spring offensive. So when are they sending them? They didn't say when they were going to send them.
This is the thing. 31 M1 Abrams tanks to Ukraine and delivered within months. They were not specific how long that could be. My guess is, well, I'll make a prediction in a minute. And this includes training of Ukrainian personnel. That supposedly starts now, and that's going to be done in the United States. So just a little bit of a look in here, Mike. It takes years for U.S. specialists working on Abrams, engineers, specialists, tactical specialists, all the mechanics and stuff, years before they get deployed with a battle group. Okay, and not only that, the United States has multiple groups around the country and around the world at which they can backfill and move around like pieces on the chessboard. Ukraine does not have that sort of personnel available to that skill level. So this means only two things, Mike. Either they're just blowing smoke here, or they're going to be sending in large teams of U.S. technical teams, which is what the United States had in Iraq, even after they handed multiple Abrams battle groups to the Iraqi armed forces. Okay, and I'll tell you this, on this issue of the Abrams tanks, for all the military heads out there, the United States withdrew technical support for its Abrams tanks in Iraq 1 month before ISIS appeared out of nowhere and took Iraq by storm. And guess what? Nothing happened with the Abrams tanks. They're expensive toys without U.S. support teams. That is just the fact, okay? So what they're talking about here is either massive U.S. deployment of so-called technical people, or they're just basically going through the motions to buy time. So let's look at this. Who's the real winner here? It's this, Mike. It's General Dynamics. Big payday for General Dynamics because the 31 tanks they give to Zelensky, that means those are going to be replaced by another 30 or 50 brand new top-of-the-line Abrams tanks for the United States military. And those will be sitting somewhere in Texas or in California or whatever. So that's where that is. So let's go further. Just to do a recap here, tanks for Kiev. There he is. And we just think that because it's a scrap metal heap, only fitting Mike Trotter's independent trading company, New York, Paris, and Kiev. And Zelensky is begmanding. This is a combination of begging and demanding. Begmanding, and I don't take credit for that term. That's Joaquin Flores at New Resistance invented this term to describe Zelensky. I just think it's so fitting. And he does this on a daily basis. The begmanding begins, and so the United States, Germany, Britain, 31, 14 Leopards from Germany, and 14 Challengers. Let's do the math real quick on that, Mike. That's a total of 59 tanks. Is that going to be a game changer? This is the question. But we're told this is a big deal. Has this not dominated the media coverage all week? This is like everything. Let's take a look, though. Just to remind people, this is that little handy little fun fact and graphic we showed you. These are combat tank fleets from around the world. Rough numbers, but relatively accurate here. Russia, 12,566. Next is North Korea with 6,600, and it goes down from there. The United States have got 5,500. So yeah, we'll take a look at that. Where's Ukraine? Just a little reminder. There they are, 1,890. Who knows what that true number is?
Well, lots of those have disappeared. They've been they've been broken down, or they've been destroyed, or whatever. So the true number is more likely to be what, 0?
Yeah, well, not 0, but probably substantially less than what it was when this chart was made. But add in those 59 tanks from the West, so that's the current number before the latest round of tanks from the West, 1,890. Let's just do an update on that. Zelensky wants to know as well. And there he is. And the grand total is, new tank total for Ukraine, 1,949. So what do you think?
I think it's going to make no difference whatsoever. But look, let's.
This is sending a strong message to the Russians.
Well, let's see how strong a message it is sending to the Russians. So the Russians not terribly impressed. This is Dmitry Peskov saying there have been repeated statements from the European capitals and from Washington that the sending of various weapon systems, including tanks, to Ukraine by no means signifies the involvement of these countries or NATO in hostilities in Ukraine. We strongly disagree with this. Moscow perceives everything that both the alliance and the capitals I mentioned have been doing as direct involvement in the conflict. We see that this is growing. So this cannot be ignored. Patrick, this is the Russians being very clear, and they've been very patient, I think, with what the West has been doing over the last year. And that patience, I think, is wearing thin at this point. They see that this is becoming much more direct involvement of NATO countries in a conflict, and therefore direct conflict with them. What's the European attitude to this? Well, here, let's bring Stefano Sannino on. He's the Secretary General of the European External Action Services, like the EU Foreign Office. And he said, Putin has moved from a concept of special operation to a concept now of a war against NATO and the West. Why should that be a surprise to anybody under these circumstances? When, this is typical gaslighting once again, from an EU leader saying, almost implying that Putin is doing something wrong by taking this attitude, when in fact Putin is merely finally acknowledging, recognizing, and being public about that acknowledgement.
So we have
what the reality on the ground is.
All Western leaders have been saying Ukraine needs to be in NATO. This needs to happen. Ukrainian membership. They push Sweden and Finland to join NATO. They're working on Georgia and the others, surrounding Russia with NATO. And this person, the Secretary General of European External Action Services, Mr. Sannino, he's saying that this is Russian aggression.
Yes.
So NATO expansion is Russian aggression. Look, I'll make it. Biden 1 year ago was asked, well, are you going to send tanks? And he said, no, that'll be World War III. I wish we had the clip today, but it's circulating online. No, we're not going to send tanks. That'll be World War III. 11 months later, and they're sending tanks. And the Germans are sending tanks. And by the way, I wish I put the graphics in. The German tanks have the Iron Cross on them, okay, and also the Straight Cross as well. So yeah, the Germans sending Panzers into Ukraine against the Russians. Little deja vu. Isn't that great?
Yes.
What have we learned in 80 years?
Well, then the question comes, why is you're saying about Biden and World War III and whatnot, but we don't actually have a direct date for when Biden's sending them yet. The question is, what's the reticence? What's the holdback here? And well, maybe this is part of it. This is certainly something that Brian's been hinting at. So this is TASS, of course. American Abrams tanks vulnerable even to Soviet-era weapons, says expert. US President Joe Biden announced on the 25th that Washington would hand over 31 Abrams tanks to the Kiev regime. So let's just look at what the expert was saying. Abrams tanks repeatedly demonstrated their vulnerability during the hostilities in Iraq, the expert pointed out. And this is a quote: "As the Iraq combat experience shows, they went up in flames. The tank turret was pierced by a 100mm armor-piercing blunt-nose projectile fired by a T-55 tank. There are instances where Abrams vehicles were struck by automatic guns of both Bradley and our BM-2 infantry fighting vehicles." And really what he was going on to say was that your comment was scrap metal. These will be turned into scrap metal on the battlefield very quickly.
And not only that, Mike, the United States doesn't have any experience using these tanks in any other climate or terrain other than desert. Okay, and even then, they haven't done, the U.S. has not had full-scale military-to-military confrontations. Probably the first Gulf War was the last time that actually happened. When was that, 1991? So a little long time ago. And ditto for every other NATO country. They don't have any experience fighting wars, but they're wanting to prosecute a massive war. Although they themselves don't want to fight, the Ukrainians are going to fight, and we'll just arm you. And I'll make a prediction. In a year's time, they will have not deployed even probably 80% of these tanks that they're committing. And that's what the journalists will say in a year's time. They didn't actually make it to the front line. So all the promises were made today in early 2023, but it was just too complicated and not practical to actually happen. So I think so much of this is posturing and propaganda to keep U.S. has to put a little bit in to keep Europe interested. Europe's got to put a little bit in to placate Washington on this, and Britain's the kind of chief whip, in the background, making sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing to prosecute the war. And meanwhile, that it does not going to affect the facts on the ground at all. And the facts on the ground is Ukraine has lost a third of its territory, okay? And that's not going back. Sorry, I don't know how they plan on taking all that back unless there's a nuclear war. Or is that the plan? Is that the plan by Washington? Is this why they keep saying Putin could use a tactical nuke if he felt he's cornered? Like this talking point. Russia uses tactical nukes when they're cornered. When did Russia ever use a tactical nuke? Ever. They haven't. Okay, this is a made-up talking point, and probably to justify the fact that Ukraine is hiding some of its heavy equipment and its HIMARS around nuclear power facilities. Just like they used the civilians of Mariupol as human shields, like ISIS does. That's what terrorists do. They're doing the same. They're hiding some of their weapons and heavy equipment and assets around civilian nuclear power facilities around the country to protect them, obviously. So, that's the reality of what's happening. So, if this is a war that the West thinks they're going to win, or they think that this is honorable, or this is all happening above board, it doesn't look like it when you actually do some basic investigation.
Okay.
So this brings us to another point. What happens to all these weapons, Mike? What happens when they reach Ukraine? Here's an excellent interview here by French international lawyer. He, by the way, worked with former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark and many other good organizations. His name's Arnaud Devalet. And he gave a really amazing interview, which we conducted maybe about a week or two ago, recently anyway, about this issue, about this important issue here. And it's very revealing. And it summarizes what was in an article which he wrote here, Ukraine arms trafficking, the Waltz of bloody clowns. And here he shows actual evidence of some of these weapons turning up on the darknet, and also being traded on Telegram and encrypted messaging and so forth. And so there's actual receipts here in this report. So we've done quite a lot of work on the arms trafficking subject over the last couple of years, and this is just adding to that. So this is where Western arms are turning up. They're going on sale in the black market. Okay. Now Russia, admittedly, is buying some of this stuff up to take it off the street. So there's that side of things too. The United States have done the same thing, buybacks on weapons and things like that in the Middle East. So that's just expected. But here's the question, and we can take this a little bit further. This is the darknet here. So this is by Freddie Ponton. This is in July. We flagged this up. Ukraine sells Caesar howitzer guns on the black market to Russians, and that was Russians taking them off the street. 120,000 each. Now, that's not what they're worth. They're worth a lot more than that. Okay, they're worth. I think this one of these units is something like between 1.5 and 3 million euros. I think on the wholesale, I guess. But they're going for 120K, and they're going missing. And this is what Arno Devley said. They're going missing at the point of arrival. So this has to be Ukrainian
corruption.
Ukrainian armed forces. This has to be their DOD or people within their military structure are basically flogging these weapons as soon as they arrive. In some cases, he's saying that they've already been pre-ordered. So there's buyers already ready, Mike, before the weapons actually get there. And when they arrive, they get dispatched via various distribution sales. And here's the other side of this, and this is the ugly side here. Are France and NATO shipping depleted uranium weaponry into Ukraine? That is a question that should not be very difficult for people. And this is a great report here by the French journalist Freddie Ponton. There's a number of good independent French journalists, by the way. They're doing really good, diligent work on this topic. But this is looking at all the stuff that France has been supplying to the Ukraine here and all these different systems. This is the Milan anti-tank system here. This uses depleted uranium, or has been known to use, even in terms of the Javelin, the U.S. anti-tank, the Mistral short-range anti-aircraft, this handheld anti-aircraft. So a lot of these weapons can, or either they're enabled to or have in the past been used using depleted uranium. That is basically poisonous. Once it gets into the atmosphere, into the soil, it takes years to clean up. There's plenty of evidence here that's been compiled as to depleted uranium. That's the Javelin system there. But what's interesting is we were talking about the tanks, Mike, the Abrams tank. One of the things about the Mistral here, this is a handheld anti-aircraft battery. So the amount of depleted uranium that is now basically blowing around Ukraine, around farms and fields and towns, and a lot of the DU is coming from the West. So we are creating an environmental disaster in Ukraine because of all these weapons. Oh, let's just rewind a little bit. What about the Abrams tank, Mike? How about the Abrams tank? Let's take a look at that. Abrams M1A1 tank uses depleted uranium. Well, there you go. So there's more DU heading for Ukraine.
And of course, we did that in Iraq. We sprayed depleted uranium all over Iraq, and Iraq suffered from birth abnormalities, deformations for years after, still is, as far as I know. Huge numbers of stillbirths, huge numbers of deaths as a result of the amount of DU that we scattered across that country. And we're going to do that in Ukraine as well, it seems.
Are we paying any compensation to those Iraqis? Are we going to pay compensation from the West, the people supplying the arms? Will our governments pay compensation to the future generation of Ukrainians who are sick, ill, or die, or birth defects as a result of depleted uranium from all the weapons NATO countries are sending? Are we going to pay compensation? Do you think that would be fair? Or we've got budgets allocated for that? No, we're not going to pay because we didn't pay the Iraqis. So we don't care about Ukrainians. Our governments don't care. If they cared, they wouldn't be dumping depleted uranium all over the country. Simple.
So let's have a look at arms spending then. And well, the UK government has decided to announce the amount of money that was spent 2021 and 2022. So £21 billion. This is spending with UK defence firms. This is not the total defence spending. And they're quite happy to tell us how much they've spent in the various regions because they're very excited about it. So £21.1 billion is the total MOD expenditure with UK industry and commerce. That's 3% increase on the previous year when accounting for inflation. So that works out at £310 for every person living in the United Kingdom. So that's very exciting. Well, let's have a look at this little graph then, which shows the amount of spending, which is, well, there's two lines on that. The bottom line, this sort of light pink line, is the day-to-day price, the price at the time, or the price at the time. So, you know, in 2013, they were spending something a lot, what was that, about 18.9 billion, and now it's 21.1 billion. The dark line is showing that inflation adjusted. So actually you can see that even at this point in 2023, well, the numbers for 2021, 2022, they're still spending, when you adjust for inflation, quite a lot less than they were in 2013, 2014. So you know, that's the reality of what's going on. Nonetheless, it's heading north at the moment, and in the United States it's the same. So here's Military Times: U.S. arms export approval soared in 2022. That's one part of this story. They're saying that, well, let's bring it on screen. Sales of military weapons between the U.S. and foreign governments shot up to nearly 51.9 billion in 2022, but the total represented a 49% jump from 34.8 billion in sales the previous year. Direct commercial sales from contractors to governments also grew, reaching 153.7 billion, up from 103.4 billion the year before. So it's good business, Patrick.
Well, they're saying Europe are rushing to arm themselves in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine 11 months ago.
Yeah.
No mention there that France and Germany had an opportunity to avert the conflict by helping to get the Minsk Accord signed. But of course, they absconded from their duties there. But that's all Putin's fault.
Yes.
We're told.